So again, we're going to look at the menus in a bit more detail and go through the ones that we didn't actually get to last week. And as you can see, there's a few more interesting settings, but I just want to make sure that we cover all of them so that you know how I use it. And if you've got any questions, anything like that, just say something in the comments below. So without much further ado, let's get on with that. So let's have a look at the shooting display menu first of all. So first up, we've got the continuous mode shooting speed. And this is not the high frame rate, but the low frame rate. So you can have 1, 2, 3 or 4 frames per second in here. And I've just left it on the default 3 for me. And that way it will just give me that slower burst rate, but it doesn't impact the higher burst rate that you set as well. The number of pictures that you can take in one go, 100. Why have it any less than that? That's the maximum. I've never exhausted that amount, so that's kind of where I leave it so that I can take as many pictures as I want, really. Then we've got sync release mode, and this is to do with multiple cameras being synced together. Not something that I've ever done, but as you can see, you can either sync or no sync, and I leave it on sync because, again, that's the default option, and I've not had the need to change it from that. Exposure delay mode, this is quite useful because as you can see in here, we've got the option of from when you press the button to when the camera actually starts to take the picture, you can delay that. So it removes any kind of mechanical physical movement that you introduce by pressing that button. So useful for long exposures, and it just gives you that bit of time to press the button and then let it do its thing. So when you don't want it to move at all, when you've got it balanced on a tripod, that's the time that I use these, particularly for things like nighttime darker exposures where you've got that long shutter speed. So you've got your shutter type, and that's just your automatic switching between mechanical and electronic, so I just leave that on auto. And then with your file number sequence, this is how your files are saved on the camera. I want them saved in sequence so that it makes life easier when kind of looking back at them, so that's how I leave that one. And then next up, we've got apply settings to live view, and this is just so that you can see through the viewfinder or on that back screen what's actually going on with the settings that you've got programmed. Framing grid is a grid on the view that you've got of what's going on, so that you can use it to position subjects and things like that. So let's have a quick look at that now. And as you can see, it's this grid on the back of the camera, so you can use it to line things up. So the red box is where you're focusing, and then the white grid is what is projected onto the camera when you've got that turned on, so you can actually line things up as you want them to be. So let's go back into here. So peaking highlights is useful when you've got a manual focus lens, so that you know what is in focus and what's not in focus. I do have a manual focus lens, and that is quite tricky at times. So the peaking highlights do definitely help make sure you've got your focus correct in there. View all in continuous mode so that you don't have any, well, basically so that you see all the pictures that you're taking, and make sure that you can actually see everything that you're taking a picture of. Our next menu is more to do with the flash and things like that. This isn't something that I've particularly used myself. I haven't got a flash. I've never used one with this camera. So the bracketing and flash side of things isn't really something that I know a huge amount about. So I'm not going to go into great detail on this one today. But just to know, this is where you find these settings, and this is where you can adjust them. It is something that I will probably use in the future. So come back again, stay subscribed so that we can discover them together in the future. But basically it's to do with the speed of your flash, the shutter, how the ISO changes and things like that, to make sure that you're getting the best picture that you can from using your flash. And then we've got our controls menu. So this is where you can customize everything. So first up is the I menu. So this is that shortcut button on the screen, or there's an I button. And these are the different menu options that you've got in there. So each one of these can be changed, and I have it set up so that I know what I press and what I want. So this is how I've got it set up, and you can go into the different menus and then you've got further options from there. So whether it's the size of the area that you're taking the picture of, whether it's the autofocus mode, so whether it's single or continuous, and then after that the points that it takes into consideration, how big that autofocus area is. So these change depending on whether you've got it set to single or continuous. And then you've got your burst mode, so single shot, low burst rate or high burst rate. But also in here is something else, which is your timer. So you can set it up for 10, 20, 30 seconds, so that camera on tripod, press the shutter button, 10 seconds later it will take that picture, so it gives you time to run around and get in front of it if that's something that you want to do. So that this is quite useful. I use this for group portraits that I'm in as well, so fancy selfies really. So in this menu, this is where you customize these. You can choose whichever option that you want to display on that eye menu, so that the controls that you change most often are easily accessible. So simple as that. As well as that, these are the physical buttons that you can change. So you've got two on the front right hand side of the camera, you've got a number across the top of the camera, and you might even have some on the lenses. So depending on which lens you've got, you might have additional buttons as well, and all of these can be customized. The control rings on the lens itself, that can be customized, and it just means that the controls that you use, the controls that you want to have at your fingertips, they're there. So I use the delay for function 2, and I use autofocus type and autofocus area both on this function 1 button, so that press of that, turn the dials, and that will adjust the mode that I'm using for my autofocus, or the area that it's taking into account for that autofocus. So that's one that I use a lot. And also the delay, like we were talking about just now, having that set up so that you can turn that up to a couple of seconds, say if you've got a long exposure that you're taking, just so you don't get any of that shake from pressing that shutter button. It will just make life a lot easier, make your photo come out a lot crisper and sharper afterwards as well. And then the joypad that you've got on the back, you can use that for various things. I use it for moving my focus point around on the screen. AF on, like we've said before, that's how I like to set the autofocus. You can do it by pressing that button or half pressing the shutter button. I use them both, and that is something that I find really useful. You can press buttons, you can twist them side to side, so autofocus lock, auto exposure lock, things like that, that can be assigned to a press rather than a move of the control. So as you can see, lots of options to customize things, and then you've got the buttons on the top as well. So for things like the video shooting button, I've got nothing assigned to that, because when I'm in still camera mode, I don't want to take videos. There's a switch on there to change between stills and movies, so that's what I use for that. So again, these are customizable between photos and filming, so you've got double the options really for how you can personalize your camera and get it set up how you want it to. F3, so in our controls menu, F3 is the OK button, and I have this set up to put that focus point back into the center. So it resets it back to the center so that I know this is the center of the picture, this is where my focus point is. And this just helps with moving subjects or going from one subject to another. It just gets things back to the starting point so that it's easier to then go on and take pictures from there. So shutter speed and aperture lock, this isn't something that I've particularly used, but you can fix your shutter speed and your aperture, and I don't use these, so I've got them off, but the options here allow you to, at a certain point, fix your aperture, fix your shutter speed so that it doesn't change from one thing to the next. But because I've set everything up manually, I don't tend to use those. Then you've got another couple of options of customizing the command dials. So you can choose which direction is up, which direction is down, which one's the main one, which one's the sub dial. So fairly easy to understand, and it's just personal preference with that. You can have it set up so if you press the ISO button and release it and then change the dial, that will change your ISO. Or as I've got it set up, you have to press and hold the ISO button in order to change the value. So I just feel that that gives me a bit more control and I won't accidentally change something that I don't want to. And of course, next up is reverse indicators. So if you want positive one end, negative the other, and your camera's set up the other way around, you can switch it over. So it just makes everything down to your personal preference. I mean, I've got that left on the default, but the option is there if I did want to change it. We're not going to talk about the movie menu, so this is G. We're not going to talk about that because I'm just going through talking about still photography today. So there are two other menus in here. So we've got the setup menu. This is things such as formatting your memory card, the user settings that you've got on the top. So U1, U2, U3. This is where you make your changes and then you come in here and then save it. Oh, you can reset them and things. And the other bits on here are kind of this is your computer that's powering your camera. This is where you can change just those basic bits of information, like is it black on white, white on black. This is quite useful, cleaning the image sensor. It basically gives the sensor a good shake in order to get any dust off of it. And I've got it set up so that whenever I turn my camera off, it will automatically do this. It will give it that shake in order to try and get any dust off of it and make sure that it's as clean as possible so that I don't have spots on my photos. And then, like I said, it's a computer, so you've got lots of information on firmware. You've got just kind of what the connections do. You've got what the menus are like. You can just reset everything back to how it was. You can start again if you want to. Two other things: retouch menu. Don't use it, use Lightroom. And that's about it for that. But this one's more useful. This is my menu. You can put the controls from the menus that you use most often into one place so that it's all there for you. As you can see, I've done this. I've got things like focus mode, the AF area, I've got whether it's face detection and things like that. But then I've forgotten all about them. So I just go into the menus or use my I button and things like that. So this isn't something that I find that useful. Maybe I need to train myself to do it a bit better. But the option is there to save them all as one menu for me that I can use going forward, so that rather than diving into the menus. But to be honest, I quite like the menu system. Everything seems to work quite nicely for me. So that doesn't bother me too much at all. So that's the menus. We've come to the end of it. We haven't touched too much on the movie shooting one because we're talking about photography at the moment rather than filming things. So we'll come back to that in the future. So like I said earlier, stay subscribed for that so that you will see when that comes out. But if you have any questions, anything that you want to add about these menus, just let me know. Put something in the comments below, and more than happy to have a chat about these things. As I said, this is how I've got mine set up. It may not be the best way for everyone to have it set up this way. It works nicely for me. It's where my fingers go. It's got things where I want to use them. So things that I use most often are at my fingertips so that I can change them if I need to. But depending on what you're taking pictures of, some people will want completely different settings at their fingertips. So it entirely depends on how you use your camera, what you're taking pictures of, and what you're used to. Because a lot of this, if you change things, you'll get completely confused and it won't feel intuitive. But after a little period of time, you'll get to know it a bit more. You'll learn how it's working, and then that is when it becomes second nature to you. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's answered some questions and you feel a bit more comfortable with the menus now. So don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe to the channel and like this video, and I'll be back again next week talking about something new. I got a new lens the other day and I've been out and about testing it out, so that's what we're going to talk about next week. Then from there we'll talk about composition and that kind of thing. So there's a few things that I want to talk about and we'll discover them together. So thank you again for joining me on my journey, and I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.